Hello and welcome back once again to the Inquisitor Podcast with me, Marcus Kauke. Today, my guest is Gabe Lullo. He's the CEO of Aleup. Aleup is a prospecting agency. They help technology companies get in front of the right type of buyers. But we're going to be exploring today a number of interesting questions. So, for example, what impact does hiring have on your result? Are we looking at the right end of the problem? Because we tend to be very focused on revenue, and we're not necessarily focused on relationships. We're not necessarily focused on strategy. The net result of that is that we end up missing quota. We've got fat middle of the pipeline. Well, we should be looking for causes. So we're going to be looking at data and the preponderance, the overwhelm of data. More is not better. Better is better. More is just more. And this then leads to a ripple effect, which in terms of technology means this technology hangover where salespeople are spending an hour, 2 hours, 2.5 hours lost in your tech stack, just trying to get the job done. And simple stuff like, are we really trying to build an SDR function for the right reasons? What's the role of the manager? What's the real role of the manager? Because it isn't to be a supervisor. It's not command and control. And what am I doing to add to one of my biggest problems, unwanted turnover? So we're going to explore all of this. So without any further ado, Gabe, welcome.
Marcus, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and I love your show, and I can't wait to get into this.
Thank you. Well, would you mind giving us a couple of minutes on your history and
Sure.
tell us how you got to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I started in college, and my first job was an internship in New York as an SDR. They didn't call it that. I was a cold caller for a financial advisor in New York. And I'm old enough to, be calling on phones that actually had wires attached to them. And so I would call through. Yeah, exactly. Call through. I was pretending to actually, I didn't even use my name. I was using the other guy's name. I was booked, and I would say his name. And as soon as I got someone, I passed him the phone, and he kept talking like it wasn't even me that started the conversation. So I started, smiling and dialing at a very young age. And then I got into sales and started a business, actually recruiting. So I was an executive recruiter firm. And then it turned into a training company. So I was really good at recruiting salespeople. So then I started to train salespeople. And I was on the road all the time. A family happened. I had a baby and with my wife at the time, and I wanted to stay home. And so I hooked up with a guy who I heard about, who was starting this business. And it was all about the SDR function. And it was right when tech companies were creating the role, because the role is really only 10, 12 years old, right? And so it started off in the tech space, SaaS space. And he said, we're going to start an inside sales SDR team, and I'd love you to be a part of the company. And so that's when Aleup was born. And we've been doing this for about 15 years. And now I've recently taken over as CEO. And so really it's an SDR to CEO life cycle for me. And it's been an incredible ride over the last 2 decades.
It's actually mirrors mine very closely as well, because I started out in recruitment, worked my way through advertising and selection, and then moved into contract and search. Was the first recruiter in Europe to specialize in the single currency, and was building teams of 40 for Capgemini and KPMG and that kind of thing.
Right.
And then I saw the writing on the wall just before the crash happened, got out, and ended up in consulting. Then 9/11 happened. So I ended up in software working for one of the companies that I placed the VP of channel and the VP of marketing in. I had my best month ever in recruitment, 96 grand in fees. It was really good. It was very nice. Bought an MG off the back of that.
Nice.
And another story. And then, so you don't need my backstory. I was going down a tangent that no one really cares about. Okay, tell me this then. What was your best mistake setting this firm up?
Well, I think the biggest thing that we were struggling with is what other companies are currently struggling with right now in the recruiting process. We were just hiring people off the streets, practically, people who've never done sales before. We thought, customer service background or hospitality background. So we just started hiring people just to fill the role because we were still new at this. And we realized that it's a lot more making phone calls and, asking for 30 minutes of their time. It's much more in depth than that. And we started to really treat the SDR role as an AE role, but just with a different outcome. And once we started hiring best in class people for that and then providing them training, that's really where it started to take off. And our clients' relationships were multi-year contracts because they didn't want those people to leave their team.
Well, it's really interesting, actually. I have a recruitment model that I'm working on at the moment, which is very similar. So maybe we'll chat about that offline. Tell me this then. As you look ahead, what do you see coming down the pipe for sales as a profession? Because I think we need to start preparing for what's to come. Anyone looking at the news, both economic and geopolitical, must get a sense that things aren't quite right. They're a little bit rotten in Denmark. Possibly not in Denmark is one of the only places that it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I think right now, 2009 to 2009 to 2020, we're very bullish in SaaS and tech. And now obviously turbulence is occurring in the SaaS and tech market. During that time, we're realizing that we were just hiring all of these salespeople, quote unquote, because there's a lot of low-hanging fruit and there was a lot of dollars being put into marketing, a lot of inbound that was happening. And I think we just got really soft on letting these people become salespeople. Now we're dealing with it now, seeing that quotas are not getting hit and and layoffs are being happening. And it's unfortunate, but it's also telling that we were just hiring people and not providing them the right training they needed to get better. They never got better, and they were filling the spot and more like order taking. I know I'm not disrespecting anyone, but that we have to realize that this is a production-based job and the production is no longer happening. And I think it's a lot to do with the skill set of the people who we've hired over the last handful of years.
I think skill set is one part of it, but also perspective and values and outlook. One of the most obvious questions that we need to ask is, what are we doing as managers, as leaders, to create conditions where we suffer from high turnover, where we have very low success rates? And I look at the ripple effects. One thing that my brain seems to be very good at is connecting the dots. So, and then what happened, and then what happened, and then what happened, and also reverse engineering it the other way. So for that to be possible, what needs to be in place beforehand? And it's a curse, because what you start to see is the interconnectedness of the complexity of these problems. Mm-hmm. And then you start to wonder, well, why are these problems occurring? And when you look upstream at the cause, it's normally a series of 3 or 4 bad decisions in a row being compounded through the organization. So you have the investors saying, let's scale. So they throw a lot of money at advertising with very low conversion rates. So 3% click-through, 15% conversion means that they fail to generate income 99.9955% of the time. And what's left are laughably called marketing qualified leads. They get thrown over the wall to sales. Sales then has to follow up on average 6 to 11 times for inbounds where there isn't an automatic booking. Now, in doing that, that could be 6,000 to 11,000 follow-up touches that are required from your sales team. Now, if it's 5 or 10 people at 15 manual dials an hour, that's a lot of their working month sucked into following up with people where they have a 3% probability of closing. Yep. So 97% of the time that they will now invest in the 99.9955% that's already been wasted is now being compounded. And then you throw those over the wall to CS, and they've got a bunch of people who aren't quite a right fit. So they raise tickets that should never have been raised, and they become a churn risk. And a 15% churn rate means 49% of your customers have to be replaced every 3 years. And you heard the palaver that goes into getting them.
Right.
It's insane. Don't do any of that stuff. Now you have an inordinate amount of time free to do good stuff.
Exactly. I know. And it's funny. I just saw a note on LinkedIn, an article that actually has doubled those activity numbers. That what the same activity numbers you just mentioned was 2-3 years ago has now just doubled. So just all of those activity numbers are, again, 2x on what it used to be. It's intense. I mean, I heard another thing that, you don't want to know what's harder than outbound right now is inbound. And so it's challenging. I know people look at outbound as so difficult, but right now it's inbound that's more challenging than ever.
With the advent of AI, all that's happened is it's scaled all the bad behaviors of the past. And so they're old warriors fighting the last war, not this one. And they've deafened their audience.
Yep. I mean, our approach right now is back to basics. And, we've been back to basics and never left, but we're back to basics for our clients and telling them, hey, listen, when they bring us in and say, okay, take a look at what we're doing and tell us what we're doing wrong. And I said, you're doing way too much stuff. You're asking a 22-year-old to do 17 different tasks and not the same task. I'm talking 17 different things. And it's impossible to expect results from them. And then the manager just sits there and looks at reports all day long and no one's teaching or training them anything.
The tech arms race seems to have contributed to this dramatically. And it also feeds the recruitment problem because if you look at the typical recruitment cycle, they'll hire 10 in the hope that 2 or 3 work out and one might survive 2 years. But the data from Dr. Phil McGowan's thesis indicates that salespeople hit their full stride in year 2.6. You're not getting the full bang for your buck anyway. So we need to start rethinking the recruitment model as well and how we compensate recruiters. So I think what we should be doing is paying recruiters not for the placement, but for how long the candidate stays. So this is where recruiters and coaches should be teaming up. Because if you got paid a stipend, a retainer every month, that meets the actual job to be done because no one wants to make a hire. They want to hire someone who's successful in the job, improves over time, fits in with our culture and values, and stays for a very long time. So we get the full value from them. That's why we really want to hire, because they can get, that's the job to be done.
100%. I mean, that's why we started our training team, is because of that reason. We were placing people and we kept placing, had to keep placing and keep placing and keep placing. And we're like, these are good people, but they just fall out of the cycle. And so we started this training mechanism where we're now teaching people and created a whole new company out of it. We're now teaching people the role so they're able to be more hireable and obviously stay longer.
Wonderful. Okay. So what is the function of an SDR?
Yeah, simply put, their prospect. Account executives, and we're in so many different industries right now. There's over 340,000 job openings for SDR on LinkedIn and Indeed combined. So the role itself is in massive demand, and industries who have never accepted this role are now accepting it. Recruiting firms, to your point, insurance companies, we have yoga studios hiring SDRs from us right now. It's all over the place. And the role itself is growing, but it's because we've realized, okay, account executives self-sourcing their prospects is a lot of time that in activities that are not really what they're paid to do. They're paid to close, they're paid to build relationships, they're paid to obviously get those contracts signed and be a subject matter expert. And yet when you pull AEs who are sourcing their own contacts, 60 to 70% of their day is prospecting. So the SDR role is to take that on fully as a separate role and qualify those MQLs, turn them into SQLs, and give them on a silver platter to an account executive so they can do what they do best, which is present, close, and get that revenue.
Okay. We differ slightly here. So let's have a discussion. I get why people outsource and delegate the function of lead generation. But the reason that they have to outsource the function of lead generation is because they're focused on the wrong end of the pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
If you focus on the short term, absolutely, that's the case. If you focus on the medium term, then you have time in one of the richest parts of the buying journey where you have no competition, because let's face it, the bar is already on the ground. As the recession and the uncertainty starts to really bite over the next couple of years, they're going to be digging until they hit bedrock. So the ability to differentiate is actually not going to be hard. But the temptation to stay with what's familiar which is to chase the short-term pipeline, go and try and close people, push deals over the line in order to try and make the quarterly valuation number. We got to rethink all of that. And the SDR function, I believe, should be one that is of maturity, because it's hard to break through the noise when everyone else is cluttering up inboxes. And how many CROs or CXOs do you know pick up their own phone if they don't know the number, or respond to cold email, or the crappy chain of terrible LinkedIn sequences? I mean, they just get kicked into touch.
Right. The way we set things up at our agency is not to be a band-aid or just to start something without an outcome or an end result. Our exit strategy is similar to what you're mentioning, is use us until you can do it yourself, and then let us help you and teach you on how to do it yourself. Our SDRs are not just sending out cold emails and, reading a script like a telemarketer. We treat them as future AEs. And if you just take that mentality and say, okay, this is not an SDR, it's a future AE. All of our SDRs, are hireable. So that's how we,
I think actually the SDR and the AE should be they're like a marriage, and it should be a partnership of equals. They are working towards the same job to be done, which is revenue generation and lifetime customer satisfaction. Okay. But they have different roles within that job.
Exactly.
The problem is that treating it as if it's somehow separate and siloing it does the customer a disservice, because the handover should be a continuation of the conversation. It shouldn't be chucking it over the wall.
Right.
So the reason I had to interject is that I think people just see it as the future AE, but actually the two together in partnership, really powerful together with customer success and product.
Right.
Because those four should be feeding back into marketing, and marketing should be interviewing customers, especially the ones who've left, the ones who are unhappy, the ones who are okay and they're not going to go anywhere. They're not going to tell you anything really useful. The ones who are seething, they're going to tell you the stuff and they're not going to hold back.
Right.
And that's where the SDR is brilliant, because if you can suck that data in from CS and feed it into the salesperson and back into product and into marketing, you grow exponentially, because you're actually aligning with the customer and meeting them where they are instead of where you wish they were.
100%.
I should probably ask you a question at this stage.
Okay.
Sorry. So tell me this then. How do you see the SDR function evolving if we go down that partnership route?
Yeah, I think it's a head count to head count, right? Like you mentioned before, it's not just a group of 20 SDRs feeding a round robin group of AEs. It's, okay, these two people, John and Sally, are attached to Joe, and Joe's the AE and John and Sally are the SDRs, and they are now in a pod and a unit working together to attack the marketplace in a way in which is communicating all throughout the day and working in those types of pods, knowing their roles and doing it in a way that is, it's like tag teaming it. I think that's the way you have to treat it. Similar to what you were mentioning, is how we do it. All of our AEs are, assigned SDRs versus just a pool of people booking meetings for another pool of people. And it doesn't work that way.
Well, again, I think one of the big problems is that we need the practice.
Yeah.
And this is where the training goes wrong. I've got this real bugbear with training, because most of it is, you may as well just burn it or buy lottery tickets. The money spent on it is quickly forgotten because people don't use it under pressure. And a minuscule proportion complete online training. The gold standard is about 3% completion rate for people like Tony Robbins, those sorts of folks, I'm told. So the majority of online training is never completed. When I had my franchise, we had the online. I can honestly say in 16 years, no one ever completed a single program. What they wanted was the hands-on, they wanted it contextual, and that stuff was okay, but it's not what people really, people don't buy training because they want training. They want to see their results improve so they can put their kids through school and pay off their mortgage. So if you look at the function itself, how that partnership needs to evolve, What do we need to do differently at the design stage as we go into recruitment? Let's start right at the basics. What's the job to be done of the SDR?
In regards to training, you mean? Or in regards to training?
No. Just generally, what is the function's purpose if it's the partner of the AE?
Yeah. The function's purpose is for them to really understand the ICP, know who they're going after. I think the AE's job is to dictate that, depending on what market they're going into and what product they're offering. And I think it's their job to send out messages, have conversations that are meaningful, not just scripted, and really ask right qualifying questions to transfer that knowledge over to the AE so they can go into that meeting with context. Right now, the SDRs are just sending a meeting over sight unseen in most companies, and the AE has no idea what they're meeting, who they're meeting, why they're meeting. And that handoff is so important. So I think if they're partnered up, like we were mentioning, the handoff, the transfer of knowledge that goes to that AE prepares them so much more to go into that meeting to build that relationship, those deals.
So back to the question of doing less but better on purpose.
Right.
The key question that goes through my mind here is this. We've got this enormous list of people that the SDR has to dial through because we're playing a numbers game. Mm-hmm. What if we didn't do that? What if we looked at the list and we segmented it and we used our data intelligently? We 2020 the top 20%. And we put those into our medium-term pipeline and we work together, AE and SDRs, dialing together, prospecting together, coaching one another. To my mind, you're going to get there anyway over maybe a 12, 18, 36-month period. It's going to take you just as long doing it the other way. Right. But now, by the time they're ready to buy, you've already established trust with a dozen different people. You know the moving parts. You understand who's on side, who's offside, what their strategy is. Yeah. And you're familiar to them. Everyone else is coming in, trying to pitch products, features, and functions. Right. So it just strikes me that we've got to rethink. How do we just rethink the whole thing? If we had a blank sheet of paper and we were thinking about how we're going to adapt to this new world, what would we do?
I would think it starts with data. I mean, like we were talking about before the call, is that, right now we're just making calls and calls and calls and calls, and companies are just doing that, and it's just not going anywhere. There's no purpose behind it. So, account-based marketing was really popular and then it kind of died off. We have to go back to that. I really feel like we have to go back to that type of approach. And it's all throughout the contacts within the company. It's not just the one contact. It's, multi-threading, they're now calling it, right? Going after the buying group and building the relationship with a group of people in that company. Because turnover's at the prospect too, right? You're contacting someone and all of a sudden 6 months gone, you have this amazing conversation and now they're not there anymore. So working each client as an account, working it as a buying group, multi-threading, getting all of the stakeholders involved day one at the SDR level is going to have better outcomes long-term.
Agreed. I think, again, the alignment with marketing is really critical because one of the big problems that I see that creates problems for SDRs and AEs is that whilst the campaign to break into the account and develop these relationships is happening, marketing is getting in touch, sales isn't coordinated, there are different messages. You're going back to your existing customers with offers that are better than the existing customers are getting because you're marketing to them and you're not connected. And so it creates dissonance and problems. I mean, it's just madness. Why do we not slow down and think, if we were the customer, what kind of experience are they looking for? What is it they want from us? And how do we create that with the least amount of effort, money, or headcount?
It's funny. This happened to me 3 times this week. I like to pick up the phone other than other executives because I'm in the SDR world. So I do pick up my phone to hear what people are saying. Yeah. But it's interesting. 3 calls I got from SDRs, every single one of them were, conversations I've had with this company prior to, had some demos, and they call me back and they have no idea. They don't look at the CRM. They don't understand that we've had a conversation. We understand I saw a demo 3 months ago. And it's like, this person has no idea what they're doing. And I'm in a buying cycle. And it was 3 totally separate brands that did it. And I think that's part of the problem is they're either not trained or given the tools, or they don't know how to use them because they're just spraying and praying. And these are big brands. I mean, these are very successful companies, and that they're just still spraying and praying. And it's just how it's working.
I think this is where we can use the SDR function as a competitive differentiator.
Right.
Because if they're properly researched, if they've got a strong hypothesis and they're mature in terms of their business acumen, they understand the context in which the customer is operating, the competitive landscape, all that kind of stuff. And they're working with the AE to help them develop that hypothesis. When they hand over, the experience is already better because
Right.
one of my partners interviewed 420 CFOs. And one of the questions was, what makes the difference in terms of how a salesperson shows up? And they gave 2 out of 5 if you understand my company, 4 out of 5 if you understand my company and my context. And what amazing advantage if you're a VAE starting from that point. That's your point of entry, as opposed to, hello, Gov, can I sell you something?
Yep. I mean, I do demos all the time from tech companies trying to show us tools and technology. And there was one from a very fast growing data company right now. I'm not going to say their name. And I got on the phone and the guy was flustered. He didn't have any pre-call research. He's speaking to the CEO of the company. I was actually not scheduled to be on the call, but I was backfilling my VP who was on PTO. And it was horrible. And he had no idea what we did. I literally asked him 3 times, do you know who we are? What we do? Nothing. Zero. And so I just think like everyone's in these Zoom meetings back to back to back, doing 12 a day, thinking they're productive. Don't do 12 a day, do 6 a day and do 30-minute pre-call research calls before each 6. And I guarantee you'll close more than if you had 12 on the calendar. And that's how it has to be.
And again, we're burning our people out. You think about the moral impact, and I know a lot of people don't actually think that matters, but it genuinely does. If you want highly productive, highly engaged employees, which is important because they're the ones talking to your customers who generate revenue that you so dearly want, it probably makes sense not to treat them like a commodity, and it probably makes sense not to set them up to fail. So they need coaching. They don't need training. What they need is ongoing on-the-job coaching. They need technique. They need practice so that when they are in front of the customer, what they've learned actually comes back to them and they don't revert back to what they learned first, which is exactly what we're seeing at the moment. All these highly trained AEs can't close a wet paper bag.
It's funny because there's so much better tools now for coaching than there was when we were trying to do it ourselves decades ago. I mean, but they're not being used. I will throw the name around. Like Gong is obviously a great company that has software and tools and training tools. And, some of our SDRs are moved over to that company and have done very well there. But I can say that it's just not, it's expensive, but I think it's valuable and worth it, but it's not being used. So they just buy it and they think it's great, and then nothing is being used. And it's a tool that could be absolutely lethal if you're using it right. And no one's doing it.
Well, you don't need to spend the money. The AI is out there for you to build your own effectively. It doesn't have to be
that's what we did.
sophisticated.
Exactly. That's what we did. We had to do it ourselves until the tool was there to help us. And frankly, you don't need that tool. I'm just saying that you need to do the function itself, whether you have the tool or not.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, you touched on another really important point, which is the lack of maturity of management. As companies scale, what tends to happen is the middle management layer gets recruited from within on the basis of individual contributors, selfish people whose job is to be selfish. And then you put them into a role where their job is to help other people be selfish, but for them to give.
Yeah.
Doesn't work.
Right. It's like teachers, like what they say about teachers. My mom's a teacher. I don't know if I should say this, but sometimes they're C students, but there could be really good teachers. A high quality individual contributor in sales is not a great manager. I'm not saying it couldn't be a great manager, but that's not the qualification to become a great manager. So I always look at it as like, Individual contributors don't have to be managers, but managers should be good individual contributors, right? And that's how I look at it. But you're absolutely right.
Well, their runway is typically, Gabe, bad news. We fired your idiot boss. Good news. You're the idiot boss. Off you go, son. And
Exactly.
that's the runway. These people have 7 to 8 revenue producers reporting to them on average. And I mean, what?
Yeah, 100%. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, to be an individual, a really high quality individual producer, you usually are pretty cutthroat. You usually are very self-serving. You usually have a big ego. You usually just like focused on what you need to focus on to get the job done. Now, I just laid out exactly what typical individual contributors at the top of their game are. Now, if I said all those things on a resume for a manager, would you want your manager to sound like that? The answer is no.
Absolutely. The one thing I would say is the top 4%, by and large, have learned vulnerability and humility, and they're courageous enough to have the difficult conversations and risk being told no. And that's the big differentiator. Above average, they do exactly as you describe. And the problem is that's been the benchmark. It's also then fed into the culture that that's how we should sell. So if you were redesigning the manager of the SDR function, or even of the sales function from a blank sheet, describe to me the values that matter.
Well, I think empathy is super important. I think patience is super important. I think a clear understanding of the personality types. You know, a lot of salespeople are shark type personality types, but they have no other way to and it's all fake, right? They're faking it to get the customer to mirror it, but they're not really a good person at understanding other people. You have to be really good at understanding all the walks of life that we deal with in the world. And if you're good at those handful of things, you should be able to be on track to be a good manager.
Well, one of the things that I learned from an old client of mine, a former client of mine, she's not old, who has now gotten into coaching around deep listening, which is really interesting.
Yep.
Is that active listening is the death of real and deep listening, because it becomes a technique, and the buyer's brain picks up on something that is unsafe. We've institutionalized making the buyer's brain trigger warnings that you are a danger, a threat to them. When we put them under pressure, we actually trigger disgust and contempt. I mean, seriously, we've put that, institutionalized it in playbooks and in systems. Any system that was developed before the year 2000, before neuroscience had any idea what was going on in the brain, institutionalizes that. If you're in Medic, if you're in Sandler, it shouldn't be, but it is, because of the mindset of the leaders and the managers and the culture that they've created around this execution of selling. Our job is not to sell, it's to facilitate buying. And the subtlety is lost on most people.
I love that. Facilitate buying. That's a great takeaway. I'm taking that one from you.
You're welcome to it. You only have to give me credit once, then it's yours. You can steal it.
Sounds good. Done.
Okay, so tell me this. Looking ahead, as the market tightens, we have the arms race for technology. You bought Gong, so I have to have Chorus. We've been doing that in SaaS for the last 5 to 10 years. Real businesses that are not SaaS are looking on and thinking, this technology is all well and good, but do I really need all of it? What are the lessons that grown-ups can draw from the kids playing in the sandpit with all of the technology? Because it's brilliant, don't get me wrong, but the idea that we need 23,000 players in the tech stack for sales and marketing, which is what it was in November last year, if I remember rightly, at least 1,000 a month, and that was before AI kicked off.
I mean, I think the market's doing the job right now for what we need to be focusing on, which is simplification, purging the companies, right? And I hope you're not part of it, but at the end of the day, it's like, it's just the bubble is here. I mean, there's too many applications. Right now. It takes, just for the SDR function, we counted it up the other day. It's about 12 different tools and applications to support an SDR right now on average. That's ridiculous.
How much does that cost?
How much does it cost?
Yeah, per
Oh my
SDR.
God, it's about $1,900 per seat per SDR right now for tech and data.
So
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And what's the turnover within the typical SDR function?
45% leave within 12 months.
Within 12 months. Okay. So 45% of all of the training that's spent, how many of those technologies are then superseded because the people who are trained in it and bought it have left, and they don't realize they have that technology. So then they buy it again and pay twice for nothing.
Yeah. And they're buying annual seats that literally six of them are gone out of the 10. And all of a sudden you have to rebuy new seats because SaaS is, scheduled that way. And now you're double purchasing and double dipping on costs.
Interestingly enough, I did an interview with Jill Robbins on what procurement are doing using AI in order to prepare for these types of conversations with salespeople. And one of the AIs that I'm CRO for, we can actually track where every cent of revenue comes through every single piece of tech, and which combinations of tech and which functions of tech, which bits of data and which human beings and which funnels it came through, so that you can architect out the fat. And then you can go to your vendor and say, Bob, I noticed for the last 3 years, we've only used 72% of Salesforce. Here's a check for 73%. Happy to go to someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, annual cost versus monthly cost, and they all try to sell you the annual deal. And from an outside perspective, it looks good, but you may not know, one, if that seat is going to be filled in 3 to 6 months. And secondly, you don't even know if the software is going to be effective in the next 12, or if you're testing it out. So I always say, unless we know exactly what we want, we're not buying anything annually until we know what we want and we have that person here retained. So that's how I do it. It doesn't make sense to be annual cost. There's a savings.
It's not software as a service. No. If you can't do that, but they're all trying to sell 1 year and 3 year deals. So they call it, but it's just perpetual license repackaged for many people. Right. They don't care about the customer.
Yeah. And look at the data companies right now are getting back. I mean, there's 3-year agreements in data companies, the bigger ones. Yeah. And those are really hurting the companies right now when you look at what's coming out with data and how much less expensive it is.
Well, we have to remember that renting, having something that extracts rent, doesn't create, it doesn't contribute. And companies that are totally extractive of their customers end up finding it very difficult to sustain. And we're seeing that, which is why they're having to go on these massive acquisition sprees. And then they end up failing to integrate at least 80% of the time. So those go horribly wrong as well. We've got to rethink. And one of the things that I'd be really curious about is how we use the SDR function in conjunction with partners so that we coordinate, so that as an ecosystem, we go to market. And as an ecosystem, we serve the customer's need. Because I think the coordination there, now the technology is absolutely available to us. Why are we not clubbing together and using community approach?
I think that's a great approach. Right now, they're really changing the name of the SDR to an XDR, meaning that it's a crossover. So instead of just booking demos for prospects, they're also booking demos for existing customers or referral partners or strategic partners. So they're reaching out. And win backs, exactly. So these campaigns for these SDR roles are great. I mean, we do what we call a rehash program, where we are able to book meetings with people who've already booked meetings months from before, because the company is ever evolving, ever changing. Mergers and acquisitions are happening, and what you saw today was not what you saw 6 months ago. And and
your context changed.
Yeah, exactly, 100%. And your AEs won't do it because they're going after, what they did for me lately approach, and what's low hanging fruit and what's in their pipeline to close now. They're not circling 6 months ago on a deal that never, went through to the next step. So those XDR roles, I think, are really important for what you were mentioning, those strategic partnership conversations.
The potential, if we think about it through the buyer's lens, technology has become a massive, burdensome level of complexity. I mean, banks in the City of London have an average of 800 to 1,000 different applications running concurrently. That is a shed load of vendors. That's an awful lot of different IP and training, and with turnover and whatever, it's very, very expensive. What they don't want is 600 throats to choke. They want a handful of people who understand their business intimately, understand their strategy, and understand their people, how they work, the moving parts. So they're going to have to sell through partners, whether they like it or not. And HubSpot's data on this is that partner-assisted deals are 70% larger. Goodman's data on win-back is that in Livingston's data on win-back is if you win a customer back, the lifetime value doubles.
Wow.
And you've got about an 80% probability of winning them back, even if you screwed up the last time.
Right.
If you go back and apologize and find out what was wrong, and even if you don't get the win back, you can learn how not to do it the next time. So therefore, saving you some churn.
100%. I mean, even in the prospecting side, I mean, how many times does an SDR or someone pick up the phone and the prospect just didn't want to have that conversation today? Yeah. And that's what you mean about the AE and the pods working together. But just same conversation, just a different person calling them a few days later changes everything and gets them on the schedule. So yeah, I think that is absolutely huge.
We've got to rethink from the metrics that we measure upon as well. So things like dials, meetings, demos, proposals, those are really not great indicators. Renewals, that's a really good indicator that we did a good job. The customer is happy. They're willing to pay us again, knowingly and willingly. How far we progress. So first meeting rates. Do you know 7 out of 8 first meetings don't result in a second meeting?
Right.
What a waste. I mean, as an SDR business, how much effort goes in. And they blow 7 out of 8. Wouldn't it make sense to ask the question, how do we stop 7 out of 8 of those from occurring? And what are we doing? Are we adding the wrong people at the top, the anti-ICP? Right. We need to not attract them. And we need to disqualify them at the marketing stage, not when salespeople or SDRs are talking to them.
Right. I think it's a qualification problem, especially in the marketing side. I think it also does have a layer in the sales development side. I think SDRs are so focused on getting their commission on completed meetings and not on qualified completed meetings that they're just throwing mud against the wall and seeing, hoping it sticks. So I think it is definitely bleeding into marketing and sales development. But I also think it's a part of the AE function too. I think AEs don't know how to set up a second meeting after the first meeting. I mean, they're rushed off the phone. They're trying to run to their next meeting. Oh, I got a hard stop in 3 minutes. All of a sudden, and then it just stops, and then everything dies, and they just don't even set up a meeting after the meeting. And that's sales 101.
Yeah,
what's that?
They don't have a pre-call plan. They wing it.
They're winging it, and they turns out to have 22 meetings that they did this week, and only 3 of them are on to the next step. Like, why is that the problem?
That is just insane. And frankly, it's negligent. Yeah. It's negligent on the part of the seller, but it's also negligent on the part of management for not picking up on it.
That goes back to coaching, right? It goes back to teaching you how to follow a sales cycle.
I work with a partner, and we're able to get anywhere between a 72 and 426x return on investment in 6 months by getting managers to become operational coaches instead of command and control managers. So they coach 2 minutes here, 30 seconds there, 7 minutes in by the water cooler. And then the other person goes away and takes action and reports back. And when you do that, with one company, $1 billion software company, they trialed it with 32 people, 35 grand upfront investment. £17.5 million reported back by the managers themselves because of their change in behavior in 6 months. They're now rolling out to 700. I can't wait to see the outcome of that.
That's game changing. Yeah. Operational
Isn't it?
coaching is where it's at. I mean, that's what you have to look for in managers. That's what you have to ensure your managers are doing. I like just change their name to operational coaches.
Yeah. And training is not about training. You train dogs. We need to practice and learn. And this is the problem, because the emphasis is in the wrong place. Trying to get people to complete a training program and remember it when you test them a couple of weeks later isn't the purpose of training. And that's what L&D do. I was on with the University of Lausanne on their master's program. And that was what all the L&D people were concerned about. And this is one of the top universities teaching leadership.
Right. I couldn't agree more. I mean, our VPs of sales are mandated to get on the calls, as a second call, and it pushes that sales cycle through, and not in a, oh, I'm the heavy closer. It's let's have conversations and let's continue the process, and that edification of that other person provides the willingness for the prospect to do it. But the AE is also learning what to do on that next call, and it's evolving their coaching.
Well, the SDRs need to be on those meetings. And
100%.
the AEs need to be making the dials alongside the SDRs and coaching them as they make their calls. Because a seller who can't prospect is impotent. And this market is showing, paraphrase Warren Buffett, showing who went swimming when the tide went out and they were naked. Because they've been left with their asses bare, and they're very exposed. I mean, the conversion rates, the hitting quota, those numbers have plummeted to below 40% on an individual contributor level and 11% on a team level. Shocking. If you were health and safety or finance, you'd be in jail.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more.
Obscene. Look, you've got a golden ticket, and you can go back and advise the idiot Gabe, age 23, who thought he was immortal, infallible, and would live, could make it through anything. What one bit of choice advice would you have given him that he'd have ignored, but other people might benefit from?
It goes back to training and coaching. I think my personal development was on check, but I think I could have invested more and more into that. I mean, there's so much sourcing now of information, such as this podcast and so many others, that allow us to really develop ourselves. And, I just started, my personal development grew, and therefore my income started to grow. And I think I would start that earlier on, knowing that the exponential, ness of it would be powerful.
An hour a day of study. You can break it up into 20-minute breaks and get some help. Really brilliant idea. Contact people whose history is your future. Cheeky ask, Kate. Would you be my mentor for 20 minutes a month? Your history is my future. If I ever turn up unprepared or don't do what I say I'm going to do, you can fire me, and I'll bring you the 3 things I've tried to fix my problem and my lessons of failure, and you can help me work out where I went wrong. When my clients have done this, out of a dozen people, 5 or 6 say yes. Now, that means they've now got this panel who are also your future employers, but they can also be your role play practice partners for when you're going to be pitching managers, because they'll tell you all the things that managers hate and that they're struggling with. And so you can headhunt your next boss that way. Duh.
Absolutely. I love it. One thing I started doing a few years ago, I just was networking without an agenda, right? Like, how many of us as salespeople network, but they always network with an agenda? And I just started, you know what? I'm learning all of this stuff from all these great people, and I'm creating these great networks, but I'm always doing it because I want this, this, and this from them. And if you just start networking without an agenda, I do it all the time on LinkedIn. I say, hey, nice to connect. No agenda here. I'd love to, hop on a 20-minute Zoom to learn what you're doing, and you can learn what I'm doing and go from there. And people say yes. High-level people say yes all the time. And I'm genuine. I get on the call. Hey, I have no agenda. I'm not trying to sell anything. Just want to learn what you're doing and learn about the market. What you do is interesting to me. And lo and behold, 6 months, a year later, they're calling you up. Hey, I just left that company, but now I'm at this one and I really need your help. Okay. And it just, again, that's not our intention, is to have the agenda. always comes back to help you if that's your intention from the beginning.
Go back and look at your pipeline, folks, and look at the number of customers who have come from earlier contacts. You'll typically find around 40% of your medium-term pipeline will end up converting if you nurture it and look after it, and you don't have an agenda to sell. Your agenda is to serve, and on every touch, the objective is to be timely, relevant, and valuable in helping them to understand the cause and the impact of their problem, and help them advance towards making the right decision for themselves. Whether it ultimately involves you or not, doesn't make any difference. If you do that, what you do is you build emotional capital. You're getting into credit in the emotional bank account. When the opportunity arises, people want to help. This week, what day is it? Today, Wednesday. So I've already had 3 people come to me because of stuff that I've helped them with in the past. And one of them is a £10,000 assignment. It's a small touch, but it's a start. Another one I met from school, I knew from school from years ago, and he's been following my content for quite a while. And he came out of the woodwork. Lots of people like that. And because I'm playing a long game and I'm not in a hurry to close anyone, no one ever feels any pressure. But my favorite type of close happened 2 weeks ago, where a client closed himself and then 2 weeks later upsold himself onto a higher level of service.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good close.
It's the long game. And I think that's the biggest thing, takeaway for people listening, is like, you got to play the long game. And I know it's not going to pay the bills today, but I'm telling you, it's worth it. Everything we just talked about is not just for the sales side, it's for the recruiting side. So if you're an operator,
Absolutely.
I have conversations with people all the time who are planted, their flag is planted. They love what they're doing. And we have great conversations about what they're doing and how they're doing it. And then all of a sudden, the company goes out of business. There's a takeover. There's a lot of those things happening now. And those people are knocking on your doors, and okay, if I can bring this person into my company, it's going to be a game changer. It happened to me about 2 years ago. But I was talking to a guy, and 9 years later, he came over as my director of sales. It was pretty epic. But he contacted me. He said, "Hey, Gabe, can we go out to dinner?" I said, "Yeah, what's up?" He's like, "My company's getting acquired, and they want to move our entire office out of the city." And he came on over, but that started a conversation many years prior.
The longest I've had as a client came out the woodwork. 17 years they've been following my content.
Yeah,
and ended up getting a CRO role. Not
and
bad.
Are they not the best? They're the best stories too. They're the ones that are the best outcome, like the ones that have been the longest ones. Usually, like we talked about with customers, the win back, they're going to stay much longer on the win back. It's the same concept. It's the relationship that's being built. It's the trust that's there.
I mentioned it in the green room. I had someone contact me about listening to the podcast, and he listens for 2 to 3 hours a day, and he's outperformed the other 7 people on his team combined for the last 2 months. And he closed his biggest and second biggest deal 2 weeks ago off the back of stuff he learned from the podcast. I've never spoken to him before. I think I might have had 15 minutes maybe sometime before, but everything was from what he's learned from the podcast. So there is great material out there. And he started out as an SDR.
That's awesome. I mean, it's just the desire to want to go get it. I mean, the information has always been out there. Yes, it's easier to actually get physically now than it was decades ago, but it's always been there. It's just the desire of wanting to go get it. And I encourage everyone to do that.
Fantastic. Gabe, look, we've come to time. How can people get hold of you?
LinkedIn, I'm really active there. My LinkedIn is Gabriel Lullo. If you actually go to gabelullo.com, it goes right to LinkedIn. If you want to talk business, my website for my company is alleyup.io.
Excellent. Gabe, thank you very much. One parting question then. If you were to advise a brand new manager and they've just taken on a team, what would you say to them in terms of creating an operating rhythm?
I would say get on the phone themselves. You're going to learn what you need to coach and train and manage by actually doing what it is you're asking your team to do. I think a lot of managers come in and just start managing and trying to teach and trying to educate and instruct. without truly knowing what those clients are saying to the prospect, to the SDRs. You also earn the respect of your team as well. So just don't do it forever. Be a player coach day one, week one, and I think that'll help you immensely in your journey as a manager.
Excellent. Gabe Lullo, thank you.
Thanks so much, Marcus.
So this is Marcus Kauke signing off once again from the Inquisitor Podcast. If you've enjoyed this, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe, and share with someone and tag someone who you think would benefit. Also, if you could leave a review, I'd be very grateful. Now, I've just released my new sales aptitude test, and off the back of it, if you take the test, then what I'll do is I'll give you half an hour giving you direct feedback of how you can improve in the next 30 days and what actions you can take off the back of it. So if that's something that's of interest, then the link is in the blurb. And in the meantime, stay safe and happy selling. Bye-bye.